So I'm going to do something that possibly has never been done before. I want you to actually get your smartphone out, if you have a smartphone. Can you get it out, please? No, I'm not going to ask you to silence it or turn it on vibrate. I'm actually going to do something. I want you to turn it on so you're looking at your startup screen there. This is actually an important analogy for today's message. This is important. So you're looking at your smartphone. Do you think that you are using your smartphone to its fullest capacity? Do you think that you're even aware of its fullest capacity? That's even redundant, isn't it, to say fullest capacity? To its capacity, are you aware of what it can do? I'm actually going to teach you a couple of things that if you have an iPhone, I don't know if this works on other phones, but if you have an iPhone, tell me if you know these sorts of tricks that your children have left. This is a safe learning environment now about technology. Okay, wait, we've got one stray. Okay, we'll have to, a couple of strays. Okay, so we'll have to watch those ones. Otherwise, this is a fairly safe environment to learn about technology. Okay, who knows? Hey, it might even be something that your young ones don't know. So in this, I'm on the iPhone. This is an old one. So in the iPhone, I can go into battery, and as my iPhone gets older, the battery doesn't last to the end of the day. So it was really helpful for me to learn that I can actually manually switch it to low power mode and save battery. Yes, I'll lose some function, but for the most part, I can still use it as I need to use it. There's no problem, and I'm using less battery. Cool, right? Do you like that, Jim? That's good, right? And then, and actually, you can also, if you go into your location services. If I can just find it there, I think it's in general there, no, in privacy. If I go into privacy, I can switch my location services off, which is basically parking the GPS. So it's not working in the background, chewing lots of battery power. So that's good battery saving tips. So anyway, you might have known those ones. Here's another one. Who likes to fall asleep to music playing in the background? Right? You like to do that? Did you know you can put a timer on the music to turn off? Did you know you could do that? Raise your hand if you knew that you could do that with your phone. Who didn't know that? Who didn't know that? Isn't that cool? You just have to go into your clock, right? I'm teaching you how to use your device. You just go into your clock there, and in timer, you set it for how long you want the music to play for, and set it for that many minutes. And then when the timer ends, you click that function there when timer ends, and you scroll to the bottom and you select stop playing, and you set it, right? And now when you start it, you can then open up your iTunes and play the music, and when the timer ends, comes to the end, the music turns off. Isn't that cool? That's good. So there you go, learn some new tricks. Now, what in the world has that got to do with today's message? So it's on Gideon. We're entering into the Judges era. And in this book of Judges, we have the story of Gideon. And it's really bottom line about faith and obedience. And when we live lives of faith and obedience, we see God's blessing. In other words, the more we exercise faith and obedience, the more of God's blessing we experience. We come closer to reaching the capacity of blessing that God has for us, like learning to use our devices to the full of their capacity and getting all of their benefits. That's the analogy. Anyway, I was trying to think of a link here. Yeah. All right. But let's jump into the story here. It's a great story, and I want to jump into this passage right here. No, that's right. I'm going to start off telling you this is what you're supposed to learn in today's message. All right? So after we go through this slide, you can then go to sleep and then wake up at the end and say, yeah, I got it. Yeah, because here it is. Here it is. These are the 3 points, the takeaways. We do not enjoy all of God's blessings. We do not fully experience His blessing in our life because inevitably we are not fully trusting in Him, living lives of full obedience. The second point, takeaway for today, is that God welcomes the penitent. He is patient, He is powerful, and He provides. We're going to see that in today's passage. And then lastly, why does God call Gideon to the task? Why does God call you and I to the task? We're going to see how God so much desires relationship. That's what God is about. These are the things we're going to learn in today's message. So there's a heads up. Let's jump straight into the middle of the story. Jump straight into the story here. Judges 6 says this. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress. Beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. He's hiding from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Yeah, right. He's hiding in a winepress. This is not a picture of a mighty man of valor. Now, I'm not exactly sure how they know this, but in the day when they built wine presses, they actually built a hole in the ground and put what they needed at the bottom to separate the grapes from the juice. And so he was actually hiding in a hole in the ground so that the Midianites wouldn't see him. And he was down there using the wine press not for its purpose, but rather to beat out wheat. This is not a picture of a mighty man of valor. We're talking about Israel. Why was there need for Israel or Gideon to be hiding from anyone? I thought God was supposed to give the promised land to the Israelites. I thought God was supposed to deliver the enemies into their hands. Why is Gideon hiding? Why are the enemies even there? And why is God talking to Gideon? He's hiding in the winepress. These are questions that come up to me when we jump into the story here. Well, to answer these questions, we need to go back a little bit and flesh out a bit of context to answer some of these questions. And I'm going to springboard off something that Leslie referred to last week as well. Someone is learning more about their device. The story of the Israelites coming into the promised land, you can focus on the positives and say it's wonderful how God wants to bless Israel and give them the promised land. But it was coming at a cost to the people who lived in the promised land. And it's not very palatable these days to talk about how God told the Israelites to go in and wipe out the people there. Kill everyone, man, woman, child, animal, tear down the altars, everything. Annihilate everything. Clean slate. That is not very palatable. And I've heard someone, I was in a conversation with someone some years ago, and they, in conversation with me, they accused God of being racist. They said that God is not relevant for today, in the sense that he destroyed the Egyptians. What did the Egyptians ever do? He told Israel to go in and wipe out the people in the promised land. God is picking on nations. Why does he do that? And I think this is a narrow-minded perspective, and we need to look at all of Scripture and understand properly over time what God has done. Let's not forget that other case of death and destruction. Oh yes, the flood. That's right. That was when God didn't show mercy to anyone except for Noah and his family. He started again. God judged sin. God cannot stand sin. He's a holy and righteous God, and he will judge sin. And we see way back in Genesis 15, I want to be specific now to the people in the promised land. Why were the Israelites to wipe out the people in the promised land? We see here God is reminding Abraham, restating the promise to Abraham when the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring," so just to clarify, Abraham is in the promised land right now. Abraham is in the land of Canaan. And he prophesies to Abram and he says, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years, so referring to Egypt." Verse 14, "But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions." And we've just looked at that. Verse 15, "As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." The Amorites were the people who dwelt in the land of Canaan and the surrounding area. And here we see God referring to the sin of the Amorites not being yet complete. In other words, God in his foreknowledge knew the extent of how far their sin would go. And you'll be familiar with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. These were Amorites. They lived in the plains. And their sin, I'm now not talking about white lies. I'm now not talking about maybe taking something that's not yours. I'm now not talking about the sin of not speaking nicely to someone or not helping someone when you should. I'm talking about abhorrent sin. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is when two men visit the city, and the men of the town almost attack the house, and they want to know them carnally. That is, commit acts of sexual immorality with the men, probably leading to their death. Their state of practice of sin had gone so far that it was so abhorrent that God could not allow the sin to continue, and he rained down destruction on those cities. But in the area of the Amorites, their sin would continue in the time that the Israelites were in Egypt. And when their sin had become so abhorrent, that is when the Israelites would go in and take the promised land. And that is why God said, wipe out everything. Have nothing to do with them. Tear down their altars. Don't intermarry. I am judging their sin. And it's actually in love that God judges the sin, because it's actually for the betterment of mankind in the area, and even for them in the long term, that they do not continue in this state of depravity. So it really does depend on your perspective of what it is that God is trying to accomplish in the bigger picture and in the grander scheme of things and the more long term. So that's why go into the promised land. And so we read in Judges 2 that the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. This is exactly what God was wanting to prevent when he said, do away with everything. And further down in chapter 2, we read, when Joshua dismissed the people, having gone into the promised land, the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of it. The 12 tribes of Israel were each given a portion of land and were responsible to go to their portion of land and to finish taking occupancy of the land. Verse 10. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. That is, all those who were with Joshua and had seen all the miraculous things that God had done. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So we have a problem of generational separation from the miracles that God had done in leaving Egypt and entering the promised land. Verses 11 to 15 becomes very clear. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. He gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the land of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were in terrible distress. And that's when we come upon the story of Gideon. So in the background we see how Israel had not gone in and taken over the promised land as God had commanded. And therefore they were not experiencing the full blessing of the promised land that God was wanting to give them. So we see here, I want to read just portions of chapters 6 and 7. The main points I'm trying to share with you overlap, that they're in layers. They don't happen one at a time. So I'm going to go through the passages and try and make layered points. So see if you can stick with me here. So the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel. And because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land. Not kill the Israelites, but devour the produce of the land, as far as Gaza, and leave no substance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord. This is why Gideon was in the winepress. This is why he was hiding whilst beating out the wheat. Because the plunderers, the Amorites, the Amalekites, would come down and take the produce. It's basically the bully in the school playground taking your lunch. Did anyone have a bully in your school playground who took your morning tea, snack, or your lunch? Anyone? Bring back horrible memories? Sorry about that. And that's basically what's going on here. It's almost like slavery, except not forced slavery, in the sense that they could go about their own business at home and they could grow their own crops, but when the produce comes, they'd come down and take it for themselves. So, not a good scenario. So they cry out to the Lord. Now, what did God promise to Moses when the people cry out to the Lord? What did God promise them if they cried out to Him? He will hear them and He will answer them. Here's God's answer. Are you ready? When the people of Israel cried out to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet to the people of Israel. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice." There you go. That's God's answer. Have you ever received an answer like that from a teacher at from a teacher or from a parent? "But I told you not to do that, and you did what I told you not to do. Now you're suffering the consequences." God reminds them, "This is what I told you to do. You didn't do it." However, God longs to forgive. And He does respond to the sincere of heart. And so now we see, enter stage left, Gideon. But why in the world choose a man of fear? Gideon was a man of fear. We see his fear. We've read this passage here, first couple of verses of this already. How he's hiding in the winepress. This is a position of fear and defeat. He is not living in the victory promised by God. Hiding in the winepress. And then I love that passage. The Lord is with you, a mighty man of valor. We'll pick it up in verse 13 there, halfway down. And Gideon said to him, "Please, sir," notice how he says sir, "please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?" So Gideon takes up the task of saying, well, come on, why are we being oppressed? And God's answer? Verse 14, "And the Lord turned to him and said, Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" Does God answer any of his questions? None whatsoever. Okay? Just avoids it. Go in this might of yours and save Israel. What might? He's cowering in a hole in the ground. Where is the might? I'm not seeing it. But God sees more than we do. The story goes on, telling us that Gideon replies back and says, "Please, Lord." Now he calls him Lord. This is in acknowledgement that, am I talking to God here? I think I could be talking to God here. "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel?" Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. What does the Lord say to him? Does this sound familiar, by the way? Have we seen this kind of conversation before with Moses? And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. So God clearly declares, I am the one who will be with you. Don't be afraid. Go do this thing. And we see his fear coming out again. And he said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign. Needing more encouragement and affirmation that indeed he will succeed in this. Show me a sign that it is you who speak with me, i.e., I really need to know that you are God. Is it God with whom I speak? Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay till you return. And he goes and he prepares, we won't look at it, but the story goes on to recount how he prepares a meal offering and brings it out. And God says to him, put it on the rock. And he puts it on the rock. And God raises the staff he's holding and touches it. And it's consumed with fire. Fire comes out of the rock and consumes the offering. And then Gideon acknowledges and knows, it is the Lord. At the very beginning when he says, tell me, sir, there's no acknowledgement of any deity in that reference. And then as he goes on, it's like he increasingly becomes aware. I think, is this God I'm talking? I think I'm talking to God. Please, sir, give me a sign. And he gives him the offering, and he receives the offering as God would. And then he knows, this is the Lord with whom I speak. And there you have a full confirmation to Gideon that God has charged him to go take up this battle with the Amorites, the Midianites, the Amalekites. And he goes on to say, you shall not die. Is that enough for Gideon? Is that all Gideon needs? No. He does go on from this point, and he does that very night at God's command, and he does tear down an altar to Ashtaroth that his father had built. But he does it at night. Do you know why? He's afraid. And so we see his fear again there. But in obedience, he tears down the altar. And then the next day there's a bit of a stink up about that, and his father goes in the back for him. That's an Australian term. He says, well, if this is really a God, let him speak for himself. No one can argue with that, and he goes away. Then Gideon goes on to take on the battle with the Midianites and the Amalekites. Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites who called out to follow him. And he sent messengers through all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, to Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they went up to meet him. And then Gideon attacked and won a mighty victory, right? In full confidence, with no fear. Is that what happens next? No. So the army is gathered. They are ready. He's received the command. And then Gideon says to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, hang on, haven't we covered this already? Haven't we done the whole offering? Haven't we, we've confirmed that it's God who spoke to you? But still, in fear, he approaches the Lord. And he says, behold, verse 37, I'm laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. In other words, it's not enough that God has said it. He's laying out a fleece. Verse 38, and it was so. God granted his request. When he rose in the next morning, he squeezed water into a bowl, and it was so. Verse 39, then Gideon said to God, let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please, let me test you just once more with the fleece. Please, let it be dry on the fleece only, and all the ground let there be dew. It's almost like, oh no, hang on, maybe someone tipped water on it in the night. There was actually no dew that night, and someone poured water on the fleece. That's why the fleece was wet. So let's flip it, and let's put dew on all the ground, but not on the fleece. That'll really do it. I'm not sure what he was thinking. Verse 40, and God did so that night. And it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew. Now Gideon goes into action. He has his men. He has his continued, ongoing confirmations from the Lord. And he's ready to go into battle. So let's size up his army. He's got Gideon and 32,000 men were gathered. But God said, you've got too many men. I can't do this thing. There are too many men. Now, I don't know about you, but going into battle, I'm thinking the more men I got, the better. Right? Is it good military strategy to say you've got too many men? I'm not thinking so. So God says, tell everyone who's afraid to go home. If you're afraid, just leave. 22,000. Go home. That's a fair proportion who were afraid. 22,000. That leaves 10. God said, there's still too many. Takes them down to the water. They do the whole drinking water thing, and the way they drank water determined who were to remain and fight with Gideon. And so the thinking is that those who cupped their hand into the water and knelt and brought the hand up to their mouth were a little bit more astute in terms of awareness of enemy around. So they can look to see if the enemy is still around while they drank water. But if they went on their hands and knees and stuck their faces down to the water, they couldn't see if anyone were to sneak up on them or if they were to be attacked. So apparently there was a fair few of those because only 300 remained. If you do the math, it's less than 1%. So he goes to all this trouble, calls all these people, 32,000 come out, and God says, there's too many. Why? Why does he say, now that you've only got 300, now I can save you? Why is too many men a problem? Because the people with you are too many to give Midianites into your hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my hand has saved me. That's why. God says, I need you trusting in me. I need you relying upon me to give you the victory. That's what I need. I don't need you to be competent and boasting in your own abilities. So that night, the Lord said to him, army's gathered, he's done the fleece, he's ready to go into battle, he's got his 300 men. And God says, now go. Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So Gideon takes Purah, goes down, i.e., yes, he was still afraid. A man of fear called to lead a battle with 300 men. What irony. And so he goes down and he listens to a conversation within a tent at the camp without them knowing it. And God has already gone before them and has given a dream. And one guy in the tent tells the dream, and the other guy interprets the dream, and this is how he interprets the dream. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon and the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. Gideon hears that and immediately goes into action. How do you go into action in a battle? Torch in one hand and trumpet in the other, right? Where's the sword? There's no sword here. They had torch in one hand and trumpet in the other. And with it, they struck fear and terror into the enemy and chased them, and then brought out the swords and won a great victory. The princes and kings of Midian were killed. God did not need an army. He needed faith. The parallel points that I'm trying to share here is that the whole story of Gideon only exists because the people of Israel were living in sin. They had not fully obeyed and trusted the Lord. And as consequence, God had given them into the hands of the enemies that they were supposed to have defeated going into the promised land. And so just like the Israelites were not able to enjoy the full blessing that God had for them, we likewise in our lives, if we have not surrendered everything in our lives to God, if we are not living lives of obedience in every aspect, then we too miss out on the blessing. Like the Israelites were missing out on the blessing of the full blessing of the promised land. We too miss out on the full blessing that God has in our Christian lives when we don't obey. But we see in this story of Gideon just a wonderful passage of God's character as he interacts with Gideon. Why did God approach Gideon? Because the people cried out. The people cried out to the Lord. And he said, well, you're in this pickle because you didn't obey. And then he sent Gideon. And Gideon, by faith, brought them victory. And so we see that God welcomes the penitent. We see his patience with Gideon. How many times was Gideon expressing fear and not ready to charge forward and needing further encouragement? We saw it time and again with the conversation, the offering, being afraid, tearing down the altar at night, the fleece, not once but twice, and then being in the camp and needing to go down and hear the interpretation of the dream. Time and again we see Gideon not ready to go and act fully as yet because of fear. But God patiently encourages him, clothed him, empowered him to do the task. And then we see the wonderful victory with power. 300 men only. God brought the victory in power. And the same is true in our lives. That he can, if he calls us to a task, and if he has made us, then surely he will equip us and provide for us everything we need for the task. We do not need to be fearful. He is powerful to work in our lives. What is that thing that is the greatest challenge in your Christian walk in terms of living a life of obedience? Whatever it is, you can trust God to give you the power and the enabling that you need. And you can trust God that obeying him in that is indeed the best thing for us to do. Why Gideon? Why choose a man of fear? Why choose a man of fear to lead a battle? And then, once having summoned an army, require this man of fear to whittle the army down to less than 1%. Why ask Gideon to do such a task? This has much of a lesson of relationship and Gideon learning to trust God than it is for Israel to learn to trust God and obey him. God specifically picked out Gideon. He was the perfect man because he had as much to accomplish in the life of Gideon in this task as he wanted to teach Israel in learning the lesson with the battle with the Amalekites. God is about relationship. Why Gideon, a man of fear, to fight a war and with only 300 men? Why us? Why does he call you and I to a task? Why do we find the task that God asks us to do sometimes so difficult, so challenging? Because it has as much to do with us learning to trust him and leaning on him and living by faith and seeing him work in us and through us, as it is the task itself that we are called to do. God is about relationship. He wants a deepened, strengthened relationship with you and with me. And that's why he calls us to task, and the task is sometimes difficult. He hasn't made a mistake. He knows what he's doing. And if I can finish with Hebrews. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of the phrase, well, you all know what the Hall of Fame is. Well, the Bible has not a Hall of Fame, but a Hall of Faith. Hebrews chapter 11, where many people are listed as examples to us of having demonstrated faith in God. Gideon is in that list. Verse 32, it says, "And what more shall I say, having already spoken about a number of people? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah," and he lists others, "who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of sword, were made strong out of weakness," like Gideon, became mighty in war, like Gideon, put foreign armies to flight, like Gideon. Why is this hall of faith there? Why are all these people here? What can we learn from Gideon? Why should we take note of a story that took place many, many years ago in a different country? Why should that pertain to us? chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, therefore, since Gideon is looking down at us, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Gideon is an example to us. We can look to him and we can see how he did exactly this. He overcame his fear and stepped out in faith. And he ran with endurance. And he looked to Jesus. And he received his victory from there. And so we should do the same. And so I love the story of Gideon. It's so encouraging to see God's patience, to see God's power, to see how he's ready to forgive, and how he so much desires that relationship with us. So I hope that encourages you to reflect on your life. Where are you at in claiming the promised land? Where are you at in receiving the full blessings God has in your walk with the Lord? What battle do you have to face? God is there with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you, and he will empower you for that battle. Let me pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you that you are patient. We thank you that you are always ready. You're always ready to hear us call out to you. Sometimes needing forgiveness, sometimes crying out for help. Lord, you are so ready to receive our cry, wanting to empower us, wanting us to trust in you, desiring that deeper relationship. And Lord, we thank you for the example that brings us encouragement, the example of Gideon. We thank you for the great victory that you brought, and that there is nothing that is too small for you. There is nothing that is too great for you. Lord, you are interested in the smallest things in our lives, and you can overcome the biggest mountains. Help us, Lord, to trust in you and to live lives of faith and obedience to you. We thank you for your love. We thank you for our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. I was strongly